I'm Mark Golub, and in the news continues to be this argument over whether Benjamin Netanyahu should or should not address a joint session of Congress at the beginning of March. And I'm sure you know there are Jews who support the Prime Minister's address, there are Jews who argue against it, and in many ways it has become one of the most contentious issues that we've seen in quite some time. Well, one individual who's been a keen observer of the American Jewish scene now for years and has written editorials on this issue is the founding publisher of the Jewish Voice, David Ben Hooren, who joins us now on our phones. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Mark, thank you so much for inviting me again. It's really a pleasure, and it would be my pleasure to work with you and educate your audience in regard to this great and important issue that we're facing.
Okay, so let's break it down piece by piece, David. First of all, where do you stand on what Bibi should or should not do? Should he address the joint session of Congress? Should he cancel the trip?
Mark, you know the slogan, never again. Never again is a hollow slogan without a strong Israel. And a strong Israel means leaders that have no fear. They'll do anything to protect Israel. They'll go anywhere to speak their mind. The days of the Jewish people being with no voice and no say about their future are gone. We have a strong state in Israel, and we have a strong leader in Bibi. Bibi is not your typical politician. Bibi is a leader, and he's willing to go to anywhere in the world to speak his mind and warn the world about the danger of nuclear Iran. We are facing a very serious issue here, and I don't understand the fear of Obama from allowing Bibi to come and speak here in America. Obama should encourage it. After all, Bibi is the authority in the world about this issue. He spent the last 40 to 50 years of his life dealing with the issue. Why is Obama afraid to let him speak here in America?
By the way, I think you raise one of the most important issues the Jewish community and really the American community has to answer. And, I've said a number of times now, the country and Democrats and Jews and Americans, there should be some sense of disappointment that the White House, the administration, did not embrace the Prime Minister coming to speak to a joint session of Congress, since that provides the Prime Minister with an exceptional forum to really address the world from his perspective. And as you say, this has been his driving issue for more than a decade. And so it's a little bit surprising that the White House felt it had to make an issue over whether the Prime Minister comes or not. So I think you say it well. What I don't hear you address yet, David, is the arguments that have been thrown against his coming, which have been that in some way he is undermining bipartisan support in Congress by placing Democrats in Congress in a very awkward position. Do they support the Prime Minister? Do they go against the President? Do they support the President and go against the Prime Minister? So on the one hand, there's the question, is Bibi's decision in some way counterproductive to a bilateral support in Congress? And the second issue is, if he in some way, I don't know, pokes a finger in the eye of the President, will it in any way backfire in the American administration's dealing with Iran? So let's take them one at a time. First of all, how do you answer those who say the Prime Minister has fed into destroying bilateral support in Congress of the State of Israel?
I don't buy into it. I think it's really not the case. I think that the opposition to Bibi is a tiny minority, fringe of the liberals in the Democratic Party, of course with Obama's on top, leading the pack. But I think America in general would like to hear what he has to say. After all, this issue is a very important issue to American. And after the speech, you can look at all those people that oppose him and I said, what are they thinking about? Where are they coming from? We should all encourage him to come and speak and educate us about the issue. It's a huge issue. And Bibi has no choice but to come and speak. This is a very important issue, and the setting is incredible. He's speaking to Congress, and you couldn't find a better place to voice your concern about Iran than in front of the American Congress, because I want to remind you, Congress is very involved in those issues, and Congress had a say. And needless to say, President could be wrong. In my eyes, Obama is wrong, and this is not the first time. And we don't want to wait for March 24 to find out, and it's too late. So Obama could be annoyed by Bibi, but Bibi has to do what he has to do, and is protect Israel and enlighten the world about this issue of Iran going nuclear.
Mm-hmm. Do you worry, by the way, that there will be some kind of backlash within the administration and that Bibi is making it more difficult for the administration to work out a serious, good deal with Iran?
You know, as I understand, they already negotiated the deal. And according to Bibi's advisors, it's a bad deal. Bibi is here to warn the American people and the world that a bad deal with Iran is a bad deal for the world. We can't allow Iran to have the capability to produce nuclear weapons. We're going to have an arms race in the Middle East. Egypt is already on board. Russia promised them a reactor. Turkey is going to be next. Saudi Arabia indicate they're very interested. It's just a question of time before this thing going to explode. And what we see today in regard to terrorism, in regard to the behavior of Iranian around the world, what you see today is nothing compared to what's going to be in the future. Mind you, people are afraid or scared to watch the video of the beheading of the 21 Egyptian in Libya. They won't even watch the video. It's nothing compared to what's going to be in the future if Iran going to possess the bomb. So what is more important, for Bibi to be annoyed for Obama to be annoyed at Bibi, or for Bibi to stop Iran from having the nuclear bomb? There's no...
Mm-hmm. I understand. I want to read to you something that was published by J Street's National Student Board President, Benji Cannon. And his whole piece contends that, in essence, Benjamin Netanyahu has been a very divisive force within the United States. And he argues that a majority of U.S. Jews fundamentally disagree with Prime Minister Netanyahu on a number of key issues. He also contends that Netanyahu's speech to Congress was organized, quote, behind President Obama's back. He claims that uncharacteristically, again, it has split the Jewish community establishment, and he is calling on the Jewish institutions to address these tensions that he claims exist below the surface for years, which now have been sort of brought to the surface by Mr. Netanyahu's decision to come to address Congress without presidential hecture. What would you answer to the description by Mr. Cannon of this criticism of Mr. Netanyahu?
You know, Bibi was welcome in the White House in the days of the Republican. And unfortunately, we have a president at the moment which is a Democrat liberal. His agenda is so where he doesn't agree with Bibi and it doesn't accept Bibi way of doing business. Bibi never changed. Bibi is the same Bibi as a leader of a democratically elected government. He fighting for the survival of Israel. He has to behave in a certain way. He has to present Israel in a certain way. And it's very hard for those liberals to accept this. But I can assure you the majority of American and majority of Jews do accept him and understand him. What you're looking here at J Street is known to be liberal Jewish organization that been funded by Soros. They do everything in their power to discredit Israel. There's not much for me to add. It's not a secret in regard to their position. We shouldn't take them as somebody authority in the Jewish community. I won't accept whatever they say as anything but coming from liberals, Jews that don't have the best of interest of Israel in their mind, in their heart.
Mm-hmm. All right. I want to mention one more criticism that Mr. Cannon levels. He talks about Rick Jacobs, who's the president of the Union for Reform Judaism, and points out that Rabbi Jacobs has been a major critic of Mr. Netanyahu's decision to speak to Congress. I should have asked you this before, David. How long have you been with, it seems like you've done this forever, but how long have you been the publisher of the Jewish Voice?
I've only been doing it for 10 years. 10
years. You've seen a sweep of Jewish history, not only in the last 10 years, David, but you've been an observer of the Jewish scene for a long, long time. Is it a new phenomenon that American presidents and Israeli prime ministers lock heads and in some way disagree, sometimes very strenuously, over issues? Is Mr. Cannon correct to suggest that when a Rick Jacobs goes public criticizing an Israeli prime minister, this is a new phenomenon in the Jewish world, or that the conflict between Mr. Obama and Mr. Netanyahu is a new phenomenon in the Israeli-American relationship?
I encourage all those Jewish leaders to refrain from criticizing the government of Israel. Sitting here in America and criticizing the government of Israel, it's so easy. It's not an easy thing to run a country like Israel when you're surrounded by enemies from all sides. Israel don't have the luxury of appeasing everybody. We learned from the Holocaust that we don't have a second chance. We have to protect Israel in every way possible. And Rick Jacobs should understand this and refrain from criticizing Bibi or Israel. It doesn't serve Israel any good by criticizing every chance they have. I think they're wrong in this issue. I think Bibi should come here and speak. And I think the American people are going to thank him for coming here and enlightening them in regard to how dangerous the situation is. This is the most dangerous situation we're facing. And Obama can go down in history as one of the most misguided presidents we ever had. And before you know, we're going to find out.
Okay. It wasn't exactly an answer to my question. I want to say it differently. Again, I asked you how long you've been doing the Jewish Voice. I started doing my program L'Chaim 36 years ago. This is the double high anniversary year of L'Chaim. Thank you, David. Thank you. And I have seen a lot of Jewish history. And when I first began doing it, it was before Begin. Begin came in very soon after I started doing L'Chaim. And there have been a series of prime ministers for whom there have been very difficult times. There have been American Jewish leaders who have criticized Israeli politicians and prime ministers forever. There have been serious, much more serious breaks between, or breaks may be the wrong word, many more serious issues between American presidents and Israeli prime ministers. One only has to think of Gerald Ford and Yitzhak Rabin, the issues that Jimmy Carter created for Israeli prime ministers. There have been issues after issues, going back, by the way, to Eisenhower and what happens when the state of Israel is first created under David Ben-Gurion. My argument is, my point to you, David, is that whether Rick Jacobs is right or wrong, whether he is doing a service to the Jewish people or not, you understand, David, from his perspective, you'll never be able to convince a Rick Jacobs or a Peter Beinhardt or a Jeremy Ben-Ami that they're not also doing something which they believe is in the best interest of the state of Israel. But my point is, when you hear people say there's something new here, not only is there nothing new here, it's been much, much worse, and that people ought to put things into perspective. And I'm asking whether you either agree with me or whether you see it differently.
They're taking things out of perspective. All he does is coming here to speak to Congress. All he's coming here is to give him his experience. With all his experience, the Israeli Secret Service all around the world, with all their knowledge and all their know-how. And mind you, American Secret Service was sleeping for many, many years, if not for the Israeli, to discover all what Iran is doing. So you should give them this benefit of coming here and just enlightening the people about what's going on. All it is a speech. All it is a speech to the American people and to the world. Why they're blowing it out of proportion.
What do you think the relationship is between President Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu?
I believe that Obama's agenda was always a liberal agenda, where we saw his behavior around the world. He feel that America should take different direction. We remember his speech in Egypt. He apologized to the world. He decided that we're not going to be the policemen of the world. We're not going to be the leaders of the world. We're going to go shrink our military if possible and let the world do their things. And the result is, you see, Iran is taking over the world. Iran is now in 4 capitals. Turmoil is all over. The world that look at America, we need a strong leaders, and Obama is not projecting the strong leaders. Obama's philosophy is very different than we used to, and we see the result all over.
Mm-hmm. By the way, David, in general, the Jewish voice is thought to lean to the right. Many of your readers are part of the Orthodox community, and there's a sense that the readership is committed to a right-wing view of Israeli politics and really American politics. And I want everybody to understand that everybody who comes on here has the right to a legitimate perspective of their own, but the viewers should understand where you're coming from. And as I hear you speak, and I know you're very disappointed in President Obama, the question for me becomes whether there has been a Democratic president that you would sort of hold up as an ideal when it comes to leading America and also leading the relationship between the United States and Israel, or whether in general you tend to be critical of all Democratic administrations.
Mind you, most people consider the Jewish voice to be in the center, not to the right.
Okay.
Very important point.
Do you consider yourself to be in the center?
I believe we're in the center. I believe we're in the center, yes. Let people judge us.
So you have people who are reading the Jewish Voice who are as committed to the Democratic Party as the Republican Party, as committed to Netanyahu as they might be committed to Herzog or Livni.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's not a question of Democrat or Republican. It's a question of Obama's policy towards the world and towards Israel and the way he sees things around the world. Obama doesn't see the problem around the world. Islam is out to conquer the world. They're doing it, and Obama doesn't see it the way he should. Obama refused to call them as all the terrorism that you see around the world. 99% of them driven from one thing and one thing only. It's Islam. He refused to acknowledge it. If you can't acknowledge it, how can you fight it? How can you understand this? Mm-hmm. So I feel like there's a major failure here. And this is an example of his policy on his outlook at the world. His understanding of the world is so flawed that eventually we're going to pay a major price for it. So it's not the Democrat in general. It's Obama's policy and his view of the world, which is I find it very, very strange and not understanding.
Okay.
I understand.
You and I have spent many afternoons together, evenings together at major Jewish events. We've sat together. We've had a chance to really share ideas. And one of the things that I know you have written about and you care about is the way in which the next generation, the younger generation, feels about Israel and is or is not committed to Israel in a way that will sustain American Jewish support for the Jewish state. David, take one moment to kind of give us your sense of where the next generation of American Jews are in terms of their Jewish identity in general and their connection to the State of Israel in particular?
I'm very optimistic when it comes to this. I believe that the Jews see strong Israel, prosperous Israel, more and more of them visiting Israel and building bridges to Israel. The program of Michael Steinhardt, Nefesh B'Nefesh, and
Birthright Israel.
Birthright, I meant to say Birthright, is something they're going to change the landscape of Judaism. They brought over 300,000 kids to Israel. A lot of them have been affected by it and got impressed with Israel and got attached to Israel. And this is only going to continue. Jewish schools are flourishing all over. I believe that the future looks great between the Jewish community here in America and Israel. I'm very optimistic that we're only going to see good things.
And how would you assess the way Israel is treated on American college campuses?
You know, Israel was busy for all those years fighting wars. And thank God, the Arab have no military option. Israel succeeded in building a strong army and deterring all Arabs from attacking Israel. They neglected this issue of Hasbara and public relation. And I believe they realized that, and they're doing something about it. As a matter of fact, after 66 years, the first time that Israel decided to do something about it was past June, where they invited Jewish media from around the world to Jerusalem for convention. My whole office was there. It was very interesting. We connected with all people that involved. And I see a movement in this direction, and I hope that this is going to be the next battle for Israel, to put more effort in Jewish media, in educating American and the world how just we are, and to try to change this narrative on campuses. And I believe Israel is going to put a lot more effort in the future, and hopefully we're going to see results. But you're right, we neglected this issue, and we're paying the price for it at the moment.
That's very well said, David. One more point in this realm. Izzy Liebler just wrote a column in which he was very critical of many on the American Jewish scene in terms of leadership for not speaking out strongly enough or for not supporting Prime Minister Netanyahu's anticipated address to the joint session of Congress. And he even likened the silence, what he considers to be silence, to the silence that was instigated by Stephen Wise in the 1940s, when Rabbi Wise argued to the Jewish leadership then that nobody should criticize President Roosevelt and his lack of action to either bomb the railways at Auschwitz or in some way to try to save the Jews who were imprisoned in Nazi death camps. That basically what Stephen Wise said was, you can't embarrass the President of the United States. Don't force him to make this a Jewish war. And in the 1940s, that became the dominant Jewish leadership policy. Izzy Liebler is concerned that some of that same attitude exists today. I want to know, look, you are, by virtue of the fact that you published the Jewish Voice, David, you are elevated into the ranks of Jewish leadership. But you also, again, are observing what's happening on the American Jewish scene. To what extent do you feel that Izzy Liebler has put his finger on something important? To what extent, quite honestly, do you feel that Izzy may be exaggerating the problem?
I urge everybody to go and get a copy of his writing. Izzy Liebler is right. I'm sad to say this, that Izzy is right. He hit the point exactly the way it is. And me personally, I'm very, very disappointed in the Jewish leadership. And as a matter of fact, if you remember, we organized some of the leaders in the Jewish community to join us in opposing the Klinhofer opera. It was a major effort by people like you and me without the major Jewish leaders, which turned out to be a major success. It was a major demonstration in front of the Metropolitan Opera without any major Jewish organization. I thought that those organizations failed us by not participating with us. And I see this again today in regard to Bibi's speech.
David, you have been a marvelous leader from your pulpit, the Jewish Voice. You have written eloquently, and whenever you speak, you're a defender of the Jewish people, the state of Israel, and really the values that we all hold dear. And it is an honor to present you to the JBS audience. You're a dear friend, and I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha. I will call upon you often, David. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Be well. David Ben Hooren, who again is the founding publisher of the Jewish Voice. By the way, I do want to amend the record just a little bit. The Klinghoffer rally that David referred to, the World Jewish Congress was there and represented, and they were a major Jewish organization that did participate. And if you've heard Ken Jacobson, the Deputy National Director of the ADL here on JBS, the ADL now has taken the position that although they think that the Prime Minister made a mistake in the way in which he accepted the Boehner invitation to speak to a joint session of Congress, the ADL now is publicly saying that the Jewish community should support Prime Minister Netanyahu's address to Congress. So, the issue of where American Jewish leadership is, it isn't black and white. It is many shades of gray. And at the same time, what David Ben Hooren is saying and what many of us are saying is that there are extraordinarily courageous individuals who've been leading the major institutions of Jewish life. And we hope that they always will take the opportunity to defend the Jewish people in the state of Israel whenever they possibly can. And by and large, they do a spectacular job. And at the same time, everybody has a right to be disappointed if they feel that the voice is not loud enough or on a given issue isn't strong enough. And I recognize, and you've heard me say this to many guests who I have the privilege of interviewing and talking to here on JBS, really, they engage in conversation with me. I'm very grateful. It's not about interviewing them. We talk together. But you've heard me say to many of them, I recognize the difficult position you're in because you represent a constituency, a large organization. And in addition to that, it's important that you walk a thin line carefully, in which on the one hand, you are critical where necessary of any aspect of the American government, whether it's the executive or whether it's the legislature. At the same time, you're representing the entire Jewish community, and one has to be sensitive to the relationship we have with the White House, with Congress. And so there's always a balancing act. And by and large, the people who lead the major institutions of Jewish life, I think they do an extraordinary job, even if on a given issue, I sometimes am critical myself. Those are my views. You've heard David Ben Hooren. Please, if there's anything you would like to say, I wish you'd be in touch with me. Please email me or write me at JBS. Or remember, you can post on Facebook or you can tweet me at Rabbi Mark S. Golub. I love to tweet. Tweet me if you can. My thanks as always to Sloan Copeland, to Serge Goldberg, the producer of this edition of In the News, Ron Jacobson. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.